Today, we're revisiting what has become an age-old battle between Windows 11 and Windows 10. That is to say, which of these operating systems delivers the best gaming performance. Windows 11 was recently updated with the 25H2 build, which didn't really claim to improve performance. Instead, it added new AI capabilities for Copilot Plus, so that's just wonderful. Enhancements to the Start menu and File Explorer, which is decent. We've got improved security, better Wi-Fi 7 support, and then the removal of legacy features such as PowerShell 2.0. So we're not really expecting any performance improvements based on that, but it is worth having a look at anyway, especially with so many gamers still on Windows 10, as it is widely regarded as the best choice for gamers. And there's also been a slew of new games released since we last compared Windows 10 and 11, and with many of these games taking advantage of new features, it could make for an interesting update. But before we get into it, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Gigabyte and their Aorus branded GeForce RTX 50 series GPUs supporting NVIDIA's full range of RTX features including DLSS 4.5 upscaling, multi-frame generation, and ray tracing. The Aorus Elite is available as either an RTX 5060 or 5060 Ti 16GB, packing a large heatsink and triple fan cooler with RGB halo, dual BIOS functionality, and a full-size backplate with massive pass-through area. Then for those of you after more performance, there's the Aorus Master range, which includes the RTX 5070, 5070 Ti, 5080 and 5090 models, with even larger triple fan coolers. The RTX 5090 Master really did impress us when we checked it out with its incredible cooling performance, unique design that's visually impressive, and high quality GPU support, making it one of the best models that we've tested to date. So for more information on Gigabyte's entire range of Aorus RTX 50 series graphics cards, please check the link in the video description. Okay, so the test configuration for this one's fairly straightforward. Each operating system has been installed on a separate brand new SSD, and for this I've acquired a pair of Team Group T-Force G50 2TB SSDs. Doing so has allowed me to swap the drives back and forth, not only to easily test each operating system, but also quickly double check and verify any results, which I do have to do quite a bit. As for the operating systems, I have disabled virus scanning altogether and virtualization-based security or VBS, such as memory integrity and core isolation. And to ensure that these features are actually disabled, virtualization has been disabled at the BIOS level. Then for the hardware, I decided to go with the fastest CPU and GPU combo that I could, though I've also thrown in some bonus testing with the Radeon RX 9070 XT and Ryzen 7 9700X. But for the bulk of the testing, I will be using the 9800X 3D and RTX 5090. Now you could argue that using entry-level hardware would provide another perspective, as one operating system version might require additional overhead, hurting lower powered hardware, and perhaps that's something that I can address in a future video. But as it stands already, there is a tremendous amount of data to go over, so let's get into it. First up, we have Rainbow Six Siege, and here the performance difference between the Windows versions is pretty small. We're talking about a 3% margin at 1080p and 1440p in favour of Windows 11. These margins were repeatable and are based on a 3-run average, so it's safe to say, at least for this configuration, Windows 11 is a whisker faster, though once you become GPU limited, performance ends up being identical, and we see that at the 4K resolution. Moving on to Battlefield 6, for this testing I'm using the high preset in our Portal benchmark. Here we see that performance between the two operating systems is near enough to identical. The 3-run average has Windows 10 just a % faster, which is within the margin of error for this testing. Now, the Arc Raiders data is very interesting, and just to be clear, I did go back and retest this on both operating systems and the results came back the same. And this is surprising because Windows 11 tested 11% faster at 1080p, 14% faster at 1440p, and then 15% faster at 4K. So not only is it very surprising to find that Windows 11 is actually a good bit faster here, but the margin also increases with the resolution, whereas normally you'd expect the opposite to happen, at least if it was some sort of CPU limitation. Of course, I also confirmed multiple times that both systems were running with the exact same in-game quality settings, so with no errors detected in the testing, we're confident in the results. I just can't explain why in this title Windows 11 is 11 to 15% faster than Windows 10, while we found the same performance in games like Rainbow Six Siege and Battlefield 6. However, it wasn't just Arc Raiders. I found a similar thing in Borderlands 4. Here Windows 11 provides 13% greater performance at 1080p and 1440p, and even at 4K, where you'd expect the results to equalise if the performance loss was due to some kind of CPU overhead. That isn't the case, as Windows 11 is still 9% faster at this resolution. So there is a clear performance advantage for Windows 11 in this title. Marvel Rivals also ran better with Windows 11, though we're only looking at a slight performance advantage in this example. The newer operating system was just 4% faster at 1080p and 1440p, while we saw no difference at 4K, suggesting that the performance difference seen here is due to the 9800X 3D working slightly better with Windows 11. Next up we have Baldur's Gate 3, and this is another game that plays slightly better on Windows 11, at least for our configuration. At 1080p and 1440p we're looking at 6% better performance on Windows 11, though that margin was halved at 4K, where performance ends up being much the same. Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty played much the same using either operating system. Windows 11 was slightly faster at all three tested resolutions, though we're talking about at most a mere 2% margin, so within the margin of error here, and not something anyone's going to be able to notice. Counter-Strike 2 is an example where we saw no performance difference between the two Windows operating systems. We're looking at less than a 1% deviation in performance, so this data lines up very much with what we saw in other online shooters, such as Rainbow Six Siege and Battlefield 6. Windows 11 was slightly faster in Space Marine 2, providing 2 to 3% better performance at all three tested resolutions, and this margin was replicated after a second pass based on a 3-run average. So Windows 11 is doing something here that helps our configuration eke out a few extra frames in this test. Mafia the Old Country is a relatively new and very demanding AAA title, and this one also played best on Windows 11, delivering 6% greater performance at 1080p, with 14% stronger 1% lows, though just 2 to 3% greater performance at 1440p and 4K. So the margins here aren't massive, though when more CPU limited, Windows 11 did perform a bit better. The ACC results show no real difference in performance between the Windows versions, so much like what we saw in Counter-Strike 2 for example, and it does seem to be the lighter weight or older games that see little to no difference in performance between the two operating systems, though that's not always the case, as seen in a game like Battlefield 6 for example. Moving on to Spider-Man 2, we find another example where Windows 11 is faster, delivering 7% greater performance at 1080p and 1440p, and then even 5% better performance at 4K. As I noted with the Arc Raiders testing, these results are a bit unexpected, so in this example I ran the tests again, but this time with the Radeon RX 9070 XT. And this did completely change the results. Now all three tested resolutions show Windows 10 and 11 providing the exact same frame rates with no deviation in performance. So identical results across the board. This throws a bit of a spanner in the works and clearly proves that performance variations between the operating systems can be hardware dependent, so do keep that in mind. Moving on to Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered. For this testing, I'm using the built-in benchmark, so the results are easier to verify in this example. Here we found Windows 11 to be 10% faster at 1080p and 1440p, and then surprisingly, still 8% faster at 4K. So there is a clear performance advantage for Windows 11 in this title, and I thought we could verify that with a slower CPU. Therefore, I installed the Ryzen 7 9700X and reran the tests, only to find very similar margins. At 1080p and 1440p, Windows 11 was 9% faster, and then 7% faster at 4K, so very similar margins to what was found when using the 9800X 3D. Now, The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered has the most confusing results of all of the games that I tested. Again, this data has been confirmed multiple times, and I actually lost count of how many times I went back and forth between Windows 10 and Windows 11 trying to understand what's going on here. So what is going on? At 1080p, Windows 10 was reliably 6% faster than Windows 11 when looking at the average frame rate, and then 12% faster for the 1% lows. But where things become confusing is when we switch to the 1440p resolution, because here the results are flipped and now Windows 11 is 6% faster. But even more confusing still is the 4K data. Here Windows 11 blows out to a massive 24% margin, managing 155 FPS on average, whereas Windows 10 capped out at just 125 FPS. This data really makes no sense, or at least it doesn't to me, but I did validate it several times, so I very much do believe it to be accurate. Sadly, I just can't explain why. But in an effort to better understand what's going on here, I swapped out the 9800X 3D for the 9700X, though this didn't really help. Again, Windows 10 was faster at 1080p, this time 5% faster, and then we're looking at identical performance at 1440p, before Windows 11 pulls ahead at 4K, so pretty puzzling stuff. However, I think what we're seeing here might be down to some kind of bug with the RTX 5090, likely a driver issue, because when I switch over to the Radeon RX 97 TXT, the results made considerably more sense. With the Radeon GPU, we found Windows 11 to be a mere 3% faster at 1080p and 1440p, before shrinking to just 2% at 4K. So this data makes a lot more sense, and is in line with many of the other AAA titles that we've already looked at. Finally, I wanted to look at Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart because it's easy to disable direct storage in this title, and I wanted to see if this affected the results for one operating system more than the other. So with direct storage enabled, the results were very similar at 1080p and 1440p, with only slightly better 1% lows on Windows 11, though interestingly Windows 11 did end up 6% faster at 4K. Now with direct storage disabled, we find very similar results. So no real difference between the operating systems at 1080p and 1440p, while Windows 11 did once again pull slightly ahead at 4K. Okay, so here's the 14 game average calculated using the geomean, for those of you who are interested. At 1080p, Windows 11 was on average just 4% faster across the games tested, and then 5% faster at 1440p and 4K. Much of the difference seen here could be simply down to the GeForce driver, as we saw in Spider-Man 2, but without a substantial investment into additional testing, with the 97 TXT, I can't say for sure. Either way, across a reasonably large volume of games, the performance difference between the two operating systems is very small. So there you have it, Windows 11 now looks to be generally faster than Windows 10 for gaming, though of course it will depend on your hardware configuration, and obviously we can't test everything. The last time I did this testing was back in late 2024, where I compared Windows 11 23H2 to Windows 10 22H2, and found that Windows 10 was generally a little bit faster. Of course, we know for a fact that Windows 11 24H2 did solve a number of performance-related issues, particularly for Ryzen processors, through the Ryzen-specific branch prediction optimizations, which were also said to be patched into Windows 10. At the end of the day, gaming performance between these two Windows versions is generally very similar, as we saw when looking at our 14-game average data. It does appear as though some of the newer games are running better on Windows 11, and Microsoft claims this latest version better supports features such as direct storage, though we couldn't actually prove that claim. They also claim that it offers better resource management for newer CPUs and GPUs. As I said, the results will likely vary depending on the hardware configuration, and it's really going to come down to which version you prefer. We personally have no stake in all of this. Microsoft has never advertised with Hardware Unboxed in any form, and we're not really fans of Windows 11. In fact, we've dedicated hour-long discussions focusing on just how garbage tier we feel the Windows experience has become. So if that's something you're interested in, head over to the Hardware Unboxed podcast. There's a few episodes dedicated to just basically venting about how garbage we think Microsoft and their Windows operating system is. On that note, Microsoft now claims to be heavily invested in making Windows 11 the premier gaming platform, promising major 2026 improvements focusing on background workload management, power and scheduling, graphics stack, and drivers to combat the Linux/Steam Deck's growth. And key features will include stuff like Xbox full screen experience, shader delivery, DirectX ray tracing 1.2, AI-driven rendering, and better ARM support, aiming to deliver a console-like high-performance experience on PCs by optimizing the system behavior and reducing bloat. So we'll see how that all plays out. So at least, maybe that's something we can look forward to this year. Certainly not holding my breath, but better Windows experience. Does seem I don't know how likely that's going to be given everything else that's going on. So guess I'm just going to end the video there. If you liked it, you know what to do. Subscribe for more content. We also have the join button or Patreon if you want to get more Hardware Unboxed goodness. We do a live show each month for members. We've got a Discord server, which is a great place to talk tech. It's a members-only server, so that's pretty great in there. You can ping Tim or myself, ask us questions. Yeah, great community. We have the Q&A series and behind-the-scenes content. Don't know if I mentioned that, but that's also pretty cool. So, worth checking out if you're interested. If not, perfectly fine. And of course, I would very much like to thank you for watching this video, especially if you made it this far. Good job. And other than to say, I'm your host, Steve, and thanks for watching. That's where I end the video. So see you next time.